So can start with inviting question or two or one or something. I don't have a microphone. Touching.
I was just looking for the context of how we're going through this section. It's just about the teaching and about the application that the Bodhisattva does. You know, when we reviewed the section on compassion, it was giving proofs for how compassion could be developed. So now it seems like we're just going through kind of we're just going through a series of things that the Bodhisattva would train in to become a teacher.
The Namshan, the Leonie Namshan Nama, Lobsang Danotoki, Khensur Toki, that Damudi Samba, and so, and Jachamoti, somebody, Kesani, Dork, the Tambe, Khensur go to the link to the Tambe, Khensur we are a rest. Ina, and that China's and some of the Yamlangi Nala, the Tenshi got the Tambe Khensur is none. Rest. No. So the characteristics are, as you indicated, the first one is compassion. The second one is the quality of the practice. That is one of the main causes for achieving enlightenment is referred to as the teacher, and that is recognized to be mainly a reference to the wisdom that perceives selflessness. So in connection with that wisdom, and related subjects are and all four of truth. The wisdom that perceives all the aspects of the Four Noble Truths. And then among those, the most principal form of wisdom is the wisdom that perceives emptiness. So you can think of it that way.
Our mentioned that there was 3 types of compassion. I think we went through 2 of them, and I thought maybe if you could just quickly explain the third. At first, I thought you didn't really want to explain it, so you don't have to. But if you could just do like a short summary, that would be good. Thank you.
No, I don't want to explain. Maybe I don't know what that is, so that's all. So the formulation is Mahayana teaching about 3 main kinds of compassion. So the first one, the more basic kind of compassion, senjin. So senjin samla mikpen means to hold that other beings, to think of them in a sort of in a general way as being sentient beings who are subject to suffering in a more basic way, and then developing compassion. And it doesn't require one to have any special understanding about selflessness or any other deeper form of realization. Then Chola Mikpe Nyingje, the one that was identified with the teaching that was given in the morning about subtle atonements and subject conditioned existence, is one where the person has developed that form of wisdom that perceives the Four Noble Truths, all of the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths in general, and especially then recognizing that all sentient beings consist of just dharmas, meaning just the 5 skandhas, and that their skandhas are impermanent and subject to suffering, conditioned existence, and those beings who are so, that's the nature of sentient beings, but beings don't recognize that about themselves, and then cultivating compassion on that basis, understanding people to be suffering due to that lack of understanding. Then the third one is deeper than that, which is that Nikpa Meva means there's no apprehended object. Literally, Nikpa is an apprehension. Then the object apprehended refers to a self-existent object. So if the practitioner, he or she has eliminated any tendency in himself or herself to hold anything or apprehend anything as being self-existent, if you have developed the awareness, the view in which you do not hold to any self-existent object, then you can view sentient beings as having been qualified by that wisdom, meaning that they lack any self-existent quality. That's their true nature, that's their ultimate nature. And then with that wisdom, so wisdom and compassion are different mental qualities. Compassion is compassion. That wisdom is coloring the compassion. It means you're developing compassion towards sentient beings, recognizing they lack any self-existent basis. Their five skandhas are empty. They are also void of any self-existence. And we recognize that about them, and then adding to that their lack of understanding regarding that true nature of their own being, then you develop compassion for their that ignorance which they are subject to. And that is considered a more profound form of compassion. So that's the third kind of compassion.
That is because I'm just moving on the today. Sugar to she beauty check. So that lady chuma tambi and the job Miss paper dish your next to them not never tender to the man and send your gift to Inji not just a man Inji Sudan Jung Chan Sugar to she beauty to the lady chuma tambi and the job Miss paper dish your next to them negative in not vision need to get this around something. Something you need to get this. You need to and switch and into the my journey into
So we have in the poem, Tsongkhapa's poem, about three principal aspects or three principal forms of knowledge and awareness that are the essence of the path. In the second, the section that deals with generating bodhicitta, the verses describe explicitly describe mother sentient beings, that you should reflect that mother sentient beings are and shuka chuo. Chuo is a word which means like a powerful, like flash flood. Not an easy word to use in English, but it means a very powerful river. And then there are four so-called floods like that, four flash floods that are Abdharma terms for the mental afflictions. And so the mental afflictions that carry us along by their very powerful current that we cannot withstand. So then that's one line. Then what is the other one? The karma, very strong karma, like the shackles of karma bind people. They're swept along in the river, but they're not free. They're bound up by the shackles of karma, which are difficult to overcome. So maybe you're familiar with these lines. But the lines generally are understood to be the way to reflect in order to develop compassion towards other sentient beings. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama has in the past, when he's talked about these verses, he said you can just as easily use those same lines and apply them to yourself. And so when you apply them to yourself, then the last line says, reflecting on mother beings in this way, you should generate the supreme aspiration to achieve Buddhahood. Then you can substitute for that last line, if you reflect upon it in relation to yourself. May I be able to generate the ultimate form of renunciation. So the same subject matter can be used to cultivate both renunciation and also bodhicitta.
No, that is it. That is it. No, that is that is Adi kunju temba iba, ta kunju tunge temba sha cheju shi sha sasuna. Ta kunju temba as. Kunju temba seta di kare sari. Ani tunge ne cheju shi sha bati. Jika apa nam jumlah temba is. Abe temba is sigari. Di shi abe temba. Apa nam ji tunge minta batan. So tu nam ji tunge di dewa jingge ari tunge dewa. Tine sibe tu dewa ram jingge apa kele tu. Apa nam ji tunge lagi kiya apa. Wajib temba mine temba apa nam ji cita siapa tar jangan dia bayi sana apa temba siapa. Isi kerja juga. Oh, that's it.
So, the morning session, we were mainly discussing the four aspects of the noble truth of suffering, so-called noble truth of suffering, Arya truth of suffering. We started to talk about the second noble truth, the Arya truth of origination. So it's worth noting, what does the term noble truth or Arya truth, why is that part of the name of the teaching? So Arya truth, noble refers to Aryas. So it's explained as those things which are true for Aryas. Aryas are the ones who see reality, who see things as they truly are. And the Four Noble Truths teach how to gain that understanding. They describe how reality is, and the Aryas are the only ones who have the ability to see the truthfulness of those teachings. So they are because they are true for Aryas in the sense that Aryas see that reality is just the way the truths are described. Therefore, they're called the Arya truth or the noble truth. Then, by contrast, in the case of the truth of suffering, noble truth of suffering, then typically those non-Arya, so-called ordinary beings, take Jampa, the person who's still subject to the mental affliction, mistaken understanding, then elements of samsaric existence, which are then in an ordinary way or in a common sense way thought of as being the excellent kinds of life or form of existence in samsara. For example, to be born as a human being, and to be born as a human being with great wealth, and to be born as a human being with beauty and comfort, great comfort, and then even the worldly gods, their existences are, as they're described, as being, even in comparison to humans, so great and so overwhelming in their excellence. So the ordinary person thinks those are the ideal form of existence. Those are real forms of happiness. And that's an error. That's identifying some element of samsaric existence as true form of happiness when it isn't. So even that kind of pleasure, even that kind of well-being, ordinary well-being, the Aryas recognize truly as being unsatisfactory. as being therefore a form of suffering. So we talked a little bit about the third and fourth aspects of the truth of suffering, the whole truth of suffering. So being empty, the aspect of being empty, the five skandhas are empty, and that they are also have a nature that they do not constitute a real self. So there is a kind of more conventional Buddhist interpretation of those two aspects, and which from the point of view of the Prasangika school is considered to be rough, a more not invalid or not not mistaken, but does not represent the ultimate interpretation of those aspects of the. So the more conventional interpretation is that the attribute of emptiness, or the aspect of emptiness, is that the five skandhas are void or empty or lack the quality of being in any way related to a self, which has, and then the three main characteristics of a soul or an atma, which is common to most of the non-Buddhist traditions that believe in a permanent self. So those three attributes are that the self is permanent or unchanging, that it's different from the elements of ordinary experience that are subject to change. But the soul, the self, is an unchanging substance or entity that is our ultimate. Then that chik means that it's a singular thing, it's one, a singular entity. And rangchen means that it has some kind of self-governing quality. So that's a rough form of the aspect of being empty. And then the fourth attribute of selflessness is that no aspect of the five skandhas can be identified as constituting a self, a real self. But the Prasangikas interpret these latter two in such a way that the ultimate meaning of selflessness, the selflessness of a person, for instance, does not allow for the five skandhas to be self-existent. So just as the five skandhas are self-existent, the nominal self that is recognized as being conventional entity, it too does not have any self-existence. Whereas the conventional view is the nominal self is identified with some aspect of the five skandhas. The nominal self, not the real self, but the self that we use in ordinary speech, usually would be identified with some element of the mind. A person can say that's wrong. The true nature of selflessness is that it's on the same par with the selflessness of the skandha.
인지가 매듭에서는 따버리는 것이에요. 네, 자신의 매듭에 인상 지불이 지불해요. 네, 풍부한 매듭에 있으면 라오가 왔습니다. 풍부한 매듭에 라오가
So those three attributes that were described in relation to the aspect of emptiness, permanent, single entity, and a self-determining entity, can be understood as meaning that the soul, or the real self, as understood by non-Buddhist tradition, is something which is not subject to impermanence. So it is, in that sense, permanent. It's unchanging. It is singular in the sense that it has no parts. It is an indivisible unity. And thirdly, that it is the Kumbhalamattha. So in the fact that it's self-governing is that it exists independently of the five skandhas. So it's not dependent on the five skandhas for its being.
That's it. That's it. Ranjuba Medjeti Kasar Agi Sutanga, Kasa Ranjet to the day with Toma Tilesi, Kasar Tamis, Ita Tuni Kagari. That is, take the rain, Kasa the Tamito to it. He is a double. Kasa Tamis and Sui Tamis, Maraja, Chara Nepche, Initially, it's very much. Eating too many
So just to kind of restate the point that was just made, make sure that you got it, then so there are a range of Buddhist schools, generally four major Buddhist schools, and in particular the middle way school, or the Madhyamika school, has two divisions to it. The Svatantrika Madhyamika school, which is the school that adheres to the requirement that you can only prove emptiness using an independent syllogism. That's what Satantrika. The Prasangika school is that you can't use an independent syllogism to prove emptiness. You can only use what is it called? An indirect proof, or a reductio proof. So that separates those two schools. So from the school of middle way school that does assert the need to use independent syllogism, and all the other schools that fall under it in terms of their considered less refined, all of those schools share a position about the nature of the personal self. That the selflessness that needs to be established in relation to a subjective person, or a real person, as being the antidote to the mistaken belief in a real person, is of a certain order of knowledge. So there's a phrase, Kansa. Kansa means person. Rangya Tuba means self-subsistent. Self-subsistent means able to stand on its own. Rangya Tuba. Zayur means to be a real entity, a real substance. Meaning that there isn't whatever the self is, it's a real thing, and it's a self-subsistent thing, doesn't depend on the five skandhas. And that's a mistaken belief in the self. So for the five skandhas to be empty of such a person is the meaning of the selflessness of the person. So you don't need to perceive emptiness to perceive the selflessness of the person. The Hinayanas can achieve nirvana perceiving the selflessness, that selflessness of the person, and still believing wrongly that things are self-existent. All the schools other than the Prasangikas accept that idea. All the Mahayana schools make a distinction between the selflessness of the person and the selflessness of entities. Usually when you say selflessness of entities, it means the empty nature of the five skandhas. And in all the schools except the Prasangikas, emptiness is something that is established only in relation to the five skandhas. It doesn't. Emptiness does not need to be and is not established in relation to the personal self. So the emptiness of the person, or the lack of reality of the personal self, is one that was just described, or the self-subsistent real entity. The Prasangikas say that notion of selflessness of the person is only a rough explanation or interpretation of selflessness of the person. The true understanding of selflessness of the person is that the object of the belief in the person is not self-existent, and that object of the mistaken belief in the real person is not the five skandhas. It is the nominal self. So the mistaken view that the nominal self is real is the belief in a personal self, and the recognition that that nominal self is not real has the same status as the recognition that the five skandhas are not real. Both of them are a form of emptiness. So the selflessness of the person for Prasangikas is a form of emptiness, just as the selflessness of the five skandhas is a form of emptiness. And that's a unique position of the Prasangika school. No other Buddhist school holds that. So the distinction between nominal existence versus real existence is interpreted in various ways in different schools. But the more coarse explanation of the selflessness of the person says there is no individual, there is no person that is substantially real and self-subsistent, or Rangyal Netuva means able to stand on its own, literally. That's kind of independent status. So, but those two terms of being real and being self-sufficient are similar in the sense that the characteristic or the standard for saying that something is real or a substance, a real substance, is that it can be apprehended directly, independent of anything else. Whereas something that is nominally existent means that it can only be recognized through some other, on the basis of or through some other entity. So there is a nominal self. A nominal self is what we think of as when we talk about people as an ordinary, everyday sense that is meaningful. But that nominal self is in the explanation of this school is something that we can only conceive of, or we can only gain some awareness of on the basis of the five skandhas. Independently of the five skandhas, we could not generate the sense of our own subjective being. So when we say I'm speaking, for example, then it's through the act of expressing words, making sound of meaningful speech, then we can, on the basis of that, we can infer some sort of nominal subject that is the speaker. But the idea is that nominal self could not be apprehended independently of that element of one's, in this case, body, that you speak through your body. So the notion of the self is that something that is only nominally exists. It has no real substantive status by which it's able to be identified on its own. So that's kind of a little bit more explaining that basic view of selflessness according to those schools.
That is some 재미있는 나라님이 받았다는 시험이 제일 있어요. 라님이 받아는 주심을 받았으니까 여기 그 유튜브에 라니 시험이 라니 유튜브에 신다진의 그게 이걸 준비하면 그 당시 신다진의 준비하면 그러나 그러니까 사실 생각만도 그런 아사디도 시험을 이유도 좋아라 다시 이걸 자고 다시 오늘 순간 하는 다시 기회가 또 다시 기회를 찾는 자유의 실제 아사디고 이게 처음 감내 샤워를 미시고 다 때야 매를 봐. 아사비리 때야 매를 봐. 그때는 아사랑이 무슨 티브를 지는 아사비리 이거 눈에는 나가시가 간사이 이거 봐. 티브를 때야만 순간 조생이 처음 때 다시 한번 아니 그걸 이제 저래 그걸 이제 저래 되는 그 통샤고 이것이 이래 시행돼 법제가 지금 이 가사를 있어 우리가 어디에서다 사다리 따위를 넣어서 제일 많이 있어요 개주별로 가사 따위를 나서 개주별로 최근에 따위를
Also. So this distinction between things that are substantively real or that are real substance versus things that are only nominally existent should be understood the way it was just used. If we kind of single out a particular Buddhist school, so for the mind-only school, Chittamatra school, for instance, they believe there's only one kind of real substance, and that is mental in nature. So the mind is the only thing that exists as a real substance. So we use this expression of the element of the mind that is aware of itself. one aspect of the mind when you have any cognitive experience is that there's sort of an observer or a witness, which is that self-awareness quality. That self-awareness aspect of the mind, that is mental, and that is real, and it perceives its object. To understand, to grasp it in the mind, it's not necessary to rely upon some other entity in order to gain an understanding of what it represents, as was used before to talk about the nature of the self. So that's one way of distinguishing between substantively real or real substance and nominally existent things. So for that school, the self is and there is a nominal self that exists, but that nominal self is not a real substance. And nevertheless, for all the other schools, other than the Pramanavarttika school, that anything that is nominally existent, in order for it to be valid, its nominal existence has to be based upon something else that does have some more real underlying or some independent quality in order to validate it. So typically, the nominal self is associated with the mind. So when we talk about the self, ultimately that term has to be identified with our mind consciousness, usually. But the Prasangikas have a radically different point of view. For them, there's no such meaningful distinction between substantively real and nominally existent. For them, everything is nominally existent and only nominally existent. Nothing is substantively real. So for them, when we perceive the self, it is necessary for us to perceive to form the notion of a nominal self based on our five skandhas. We experience our five skandhas, and then the five skandhas become the underlying conceptual basis that allows us to form conceptually the notion of a self that is associated with those five skandhas. But that nominal self is not to be identified with consciousness or any other part of the five skandhas. So in that sense, their interpretation is more radical. And that distinction needs to be, it's useful to understand that difference between the Prasangikas and all the other schools, especially as it applies to how to understand the nature of the personal self, or lack thereof. So, just as the truth of suffering has four aspects, so too does the truth of origination. And typically, we focus mostly on that. So each of the names of the Four Noble Truths represents one of its four aspects. So, the truth of suffering, one of the four aspects of the truth of suffering is suffering. One of the four aspects of the truth of origination is origination. There are three others. So when we're talking about the truth of origination, that usually is identified as being made up of two elements. The element of the mental afflictions and the element of the impure karma. So the defining or the common quality that applies to all of the mental afflictions, all of the root mental afflictions, all the secondary mental afflictions, is that the word klesha means something which is an agitated or an unsettled state of mind. So the mind that's free of the mental afflictions is a kind of state of calm equanimity. But anytime a mental affliction becomes manifest in your mind, whatever form it is, there is some aspect of it that is unsettled to the mind as a whole. So that's kind of the basic quality that's common to all mental afflictions.
다들 영웅시한테하고 비슷한 것들 다의 있는 것, 예 있는 것 같습니다. 다에서 있고, 너무 추워요 지금. 이게 그야 뭐 그런 차도 있는 것도 이제 그야. 내가 다의 있는 것 같습니다. 다들 제자 시다 아니 그래.
People
지금
like here.
아니 제도인데 나왔을 때 어떻게 논의야 그래 사회 있는 것 같으시게
So when we're talking about the mental afflictions, in particular as the object to be abandoned, generally that's associated with what are called the root mental afflictions. And the root mental afflictions are kind of the most prominent or the most significant aspects of those unsettled minds. Then there also are so-called secondary mental afflictions. Those secondary mental afflictions are not distinct in nature from the root mental afflictions. They're generally a secondary form of one or another of the root mental afflictions. So the root mental afflictions are identified as typically as being 6 in number. Then desire, hatred, ignorance, pride, doubt, and this last one is mistaken views, not wrong view, but erring views. And then following the formulation of the Yogacara school of the way of identifying root and secondary mental afflictions, then the Yogacara school generally has a category of 20 secondary mental afflictions. Yeah, 20. So we won't take the time to enumerate all of the secondary mental afflictions or subject of the root mental afflictions. Can be done at length, but we're not done.
가르치는 의사들 시단주시 좀 미래도 디마시 내주게 다째는 심세이 차지고 야 레시데리 세치야 심세이 차지고 레시데리 세 어디에서가 심주세도 내가 제도 게임 제도 내주니 내가 자가를 지는 제도 게임하고 내가 시비니 지어가 어디에 따뜻한 심세도 이게 연대서
So,
자본문이 주인에서 그것은 미안해. 좋아지는 주인은 미안해.
Gyumed.
까지 그래서 다른 세단에 주는 그래서 세단에 대해서 어떻게 이제 세단 어떻게 내가 세단이 이제 다시 세단에 대해서 이제 뭔가 좀 말이 되고 내가 무슨 말 같다. 이게 내가 무슨 일이 있는 것도 싶다는데 내가 무슨 일이 있지. 말이다 진짜 담배도 피시를 버려봐. 이제는 그런 게 괜찮은 얘기를
So we need to become more clear or more knowledgeable about the nature of our mind. Our mind is not just one amorphous thing. Rather, so the mental afflictions, so just and root and secondary, represent an aspect of the mind that are referred to variously. I remember in old days when I was younger, they referred to them as mental derivatives, which is a very literal way of translating the word chaita. Nowadays, more commonly, they're referred to as mental factors, probably because they are included in the fourth skandha. So the fourth of the fifth skandha is made up of sort of secondary elements of the mind, which are generally identified and recognized as carrying out some or another kind of mental function or action, and they're identified by their essential quality and particularly how they affect our life in a good way or a bad way, or just enabling the mind to function. And they're all in the fourth skandha, all the mental afflictions. The fourth skandha is not limited to the mental afflictions. There are other sorts of mental factors there as well, basic forms of mental then processing, of cognitive and processing, and all kinds of sensory perception and mental consciousness. Then there are basic functions that are necessary for that to take place. Then there are virtuous mental states. And so the various categories of mental factors, two of which are the root mental afflictions and secondary mental afflictions. Then the fifth skandha is made up of awareness or consciousness. You can translate it as consciousness. And consciousness is just a category of mental entity in the sense that it's a more primary element of the mind. Various ways of thinking of it. What's described it, the way that we need to be aware of it is that it's the quality of the mind that has two aspects to it. That it is luminous in the sense that it can perceive things. It can shed light, metaphorically speaking, on objects. And rikpa means, and it can also gain an understanding about objects. So that sort of luminous awareness, kind of the essential way of thinking of the primary aspect of our consciousness. And that's something that, while it's momentary, it is something that we stays with us. And in particular, we can think of it as that quality of our mental being that is elevated as we develop along the spiritual path. That's kind of the most underlying and important element of our consciousness that we're trying to refine. The secondary factors, mental factors, especially those that are mental afflictions, but it also applies to virtuous mental states. What's significant about them is that they are temporary and they are occasional in the sense that they may or may not be present in the mind. We can have states of mind where the mental afflictions are not actively present, or some secondary mental afflictions. And then there can be occasions when they do become overt. And the mental afflictions, in particular, along with the secondary mental afflictions, are those elements that we say have an obscuring quality. They are obscuration. They prevent the mind from being able to gain transcendent awareness, for example. Then also these secondary mental factors are kind of subsidiary to the main element of our awareness. They're thought of, typically in Tibetan they use the word that they are sort of the retinue or the accompanying elements of the mind. But the principal aspect of our mind is that is the main awareness. The mind awareness, mind consciousness, and then mind consciousness, among the elements of mind consciousness, then the fact that the mind consciousness it has a pure aspect to it, which is its lack of self-existence, and that is mind's then capacity to become like mind consciousness. That is usually referred to as Buddha nature. So that element of mind consciousness, which is untainted, is something that we think of as what we're trying to develop, and it's the basis that we can follow as we make progress spiritually. The mental afflictions are not like that, in that they only are present during certain circumstances. At other times, they're not. But during the time that they are not active, that doesn't mean they are non-existent. But what it means is that they take on a dormant state. And that means that the potential for them to reappear remains. And the only way to eradicate them is to eradicate that potential, the seeds of those mental afflictions. So when we achieve transcendent realization, what we're doing is we're destroying the possibility of those dormant qualities to reappear. And that can only be accomplished by the wisdom that perceives the nature of reality. So these are all related in the sense that they are part of what we need to know about our own minds, especially as pertains to spiritual path.
소주기 소주기 삼면에서 양식 이것마디 삼면에서 뒤지기 나기래 뒤지기 유기래 어디에서 소주보다 주인도 생각지어봐
소주보다
소주보다 주인도 생각지어 생각지 because yeah, it's very that is so sure that we can we number the count number the number that's the number that's the getting you going to go naturally. That's the number unique that teachers that is so if you remember to send a chair, you send a ledge. So if you legally cheap there, you yes. Yeah, dream my neighbors, dream my teacher. You have yes. You do it from the lady. You can do it in the lady. Okay, you can generate yes, yes. And we so you can make a piece, you chair, chair. Yes, now that you need to the ledge, temperature, then I ask again. And we so you can in the chair, but yes, the thing you will you will lose any we teacher. Now we teacher here.
So then the other main element of the truth origination is karma. So karma then in the Abhidharma is generally described as being two kinds of karma. One is uses the word semba. Semba is chetana. Chetana is I remember people translating the word as meditation. Weird word. It refers to a particular mental factor, one of those secondary mental factors in the fourth skandha. And it refers to the mental factor, which is an impulse, sometimes translated volition. Now, volition is the desire to do something. In a sense, it's that, but it's also more subtle. The actual definition of it is it's the quality, the mental factor, its essential quality is that it drives the main mind to engage a particular object. It causes the mind to be to move or to be driven to some particular object, some mental object. So any impulse that drives the mind towards an object, that is the mental factor that's called semba in Tibet or cheta. In the larger, so that's a kind of psychological definition. In the larger sense of karma that affects our lives, typically that quality is identified with the intent to do something, or the impulse to do something, or the thought, I would like to do this, then that is referred to as that aspect of karma. Then when you have that intention or that impulse or that volition to carry out a particular act, then certain kinds of acts, physical acts, for instance, then require you to exert some sort of physical activity, or verbal acts involve some kind of verbal activity. Then the schools, the different Buddhist schools have some slight different ways of explaining verbal and physical karma. So verbal and physical karma are different from volition. Volition is mental karma, and that's kind of the root of all karma. Then verbal and physical karma are described as that karma which is the result of, or which is produced by that initial volition. So it's karma that has been reflected upon, in the sense of, if you want to carry out the intention to do something, to take a life, for instance, then you have to do some kind of either physical or verbal action to bring that intention to fruition. So whatever physical activity or verbal activity you will be able to carry those kinds of acts out, then that is tambele, or the karma which is a result of thought. Literally, chetai thought, it means the past parts of something which has been thought of. And then the kind of the philosophical sense, one of the distinctions that are made is that the act of physically, for instance, stabbing someone with a knife, for instance, to kill them, that's a physical act that can be, it's referred to as an informative form. Informative means other people can understand your intention by that orientation of your body. If they see you stab somebody, they know that you have something against that person, because in their mind is some motivation, to either desire or hatred or life that drove you to do that. So the very instant in which you stab the person is the first moment of completing the physical act, for example. And then the kind of most naive realism, the Vaibhashika school, and the most refined school, the Prasangika school, both of them claim that the orientation of your body when that physical act is carried out is the essence of the physical karma, for instance. And when you speak words such as a lie, the sound of your voice that is giving expression to the lie is the verbal karma. But only those two schools identify physical and verbal karma with something that is physical in nature. All the other schools say that those physical qualities are morally, neutral. They themselves inherently are not immoral or moral. What makes them moral or immoral is the intention that is the impulse for those physical and verbal acts. So physical karma and verbal karma, be it good or bad, for kind of all the other schools in between, is explained as being the form of volition that is the impulse to carry out that physical activity or that verbal activity, rather than the physical entity itself. So those are kind of technical. The significant thing about verbal and all three of those, physical, verbal, and mental karma, is that the manifest form of volition, the manifest form of that first moment of bringing another person's life to an end, or completing the act of uttering a lie, for instance, that's the initial moment of the karmic act. And the moment following that, then there's no more evidence of the, especially physical and verbal forms of karma. So it becomes what's called the non-informative form, right? Meaning that it's no longer capable of being perceived. But it is the act itself is not without consequence. By having engaged in the act, in the second moment, you establish some kind of potential, some kind of karmic seed, just as the mental afflictions have seeds. The karma has its own seeds, which are a capacity that is how do I say, infused in your being. And usually it's understood to be infused in your mind consciousness. So the where the karmic seeds are stored, or where the karmic seeds are, associated with your being, is usually associated with the mind. And then as the mind consciousness continues, those seeds also have an impermanent continuum. And those seeds carry the potential that whenever the right circumstances present themselves, then those seeds will ripen and manifest some kind of karmic result. So that's kind of an overview of the doctrine and how to understand the subject matter of karma.
That is and yes, we did.
So so there are a lot of additional, this is kind of a very brief essence of the nature of karma. There's many other significant formulations and explanations that are relevant to the overall subject of karma that, if understood, will give you a much kind of more refined overview of how karma is meant to be understood, as explained in the Buddhist treatise, philosophical works. So the karma is not fulfilled, or it's not a complete act merely by forming the thought that represents the intention or the desire to carry out some action. So that's the initial intention. But if it's, for instance, the desire to harm another person, whether it's to kill them or steal something from them, then in order for that act to be fulfilled, Yonshu Dopa, so Yonshu Dopa means to come to completion, then it has to go beyond that state of intention. So then there has to be some means that's used how you are going to fulfill that intention, and then it comes to its culmination when you actually cause the aim of your intention to be achieved. And if the other person that is your intended object to kill, if you actually cause her life to be come to an end, only then have you completed the act of taking a life. So there are all kinds of elements in that whole process that can affect that act to make it either more or less powerful. For instance, you might at some point along the line have second thoughts and decide not to fulfill the act. But the intention initially to take the life still represents some element of karma that you have accumulated mentally, just was not carried out into action in terms of whatever means, or physical or verbal, or to actually cause your intention to be achieved. So that's one sort of element of karma. Then kind of losing everything, all the things from which is that the element of the act itself was described as nambarikje in Tibetan. Nambarikje means vinyapti in Sanskrit, which means causing something to be known. So it means that when your body is in a particular orientation, can be that orientation of your body can inform or make known to others what state of mind you have. And so the use of the term in the context of karma is that at the moment that the act is being completed, there is that possibility of other people taking notice of it and realizing that you are the agent and it was your intention. It's visible. It's from observing your physical makeup. Another example of that is if you become angry, for instance, it can affect your complexion. You go red in the face. So that quality of being red in the face can be read, R-E-A-D, as an indication that you're angry. So that's an informative form, that color of your face. And there are other ways of face. You make other kinds of gestures that can indicate a virtuous state of mind. So the point is that that final point at which you complete an act that marks its conclusion as an act that is followed by some element of non-informative form, meaning that your own being is somehow affected by the fact that you carried out that action, and that represents the seed of the karma. And that is called nambarikje mayimbesu, means abhignapti, something which cannot be directly observed by ordinary people, but it's something that you have done as a result of having carried out the action. You have affected yourself and caused this condition to be established in yourself, and that remains with you, and then at a certain time in the future, typically, not exclusively, but for example, one of the significant ways in which karma ripens is at the end of your life, as you're facing your death, and as we mentioned before, the attachment to your not wanting to undergo annihilation, the desire not to die, the attachment to continued existence. That desire at that moment has two kind of particular elements. One's called craving, and the other one's called grasping. And there are two degrees of two different intensities of desire, particular kinds of desire. And at the end of your life, those aspects of desire have the effect of unwittingly, you don't know it, but that form of desire has the ability to what's the word, awaken or ripen or Setava means to, Sotava means activate that potential. And then whatever that potential, whichever one of your manifold and infinite numbers of karma might be, the particular one that gets activated then will be the karma that will be the driving force that determines what your next life will be. So this is another aspect of the doctrine of karma that is obviously of great significance in terms of our understanding of the nature of life.
That yes, in the question that did Tomabu Jennifer teachers sooner. She did the number 18 is to Verba. Tati Manga, Tati Nige Shuman, to get the dog in the Resina, Jedamo in it, Polung to Pangetum, Polung Tamuya Sunan, Yivichi, teach Gabriva, Tati Shash and Roma Puccini, and Shuman, Dare Sunan, Tati Panget Tingreba, Panget any. Connects to Tingreba. And Yasha to Nayati Panjatiba. Panjanation to Shasha is there. It is number 18 to the card. That is the necessary and to get to be able to do it. When you Panjata, which is the Rama and change by the teaching.
Oh,
Teaching is.
So the nature of that condition that is established in your being that determines that your actions have consequences, karmic consequences, is understood in a variety of ways in different Buddhist schools. For example, the most kind of simplistic point of view is usually identified with the so-called Vaibhashika school, which is the early Sarvastivada Abhidharma tradition. And so they have literature and they have explanations. The Abhidharma Kosha is kind of the compendium of their doctrine. So according to them, they describe that condition, which is the basis for the ripening of karma, as being like a promissory note that you create when you take a loan, when you borrow some money. There's a promissory note, and then the person that you took the loan from has the right to claim that you repay the note. So when the karma ripens, they use it as the calling in of the promissory note of karma. They use a language like that, which is they refer to it as some kind of real entity that is within your being. The Prasangikas, who don't believe anything it has any real substantive nature, believe, obviously, in karmic seeds. They have a very interesting kind of interpretation. So there is a expression that when an entity ceases to exist, right? When an entity exists, right, it is present. When it ceases to exist, it goes into the past, right, and it becomes a shikpa, means something which has, which is in a sense ceased to exist. It is an entity that has its existence has terminated. So in the sense that it's and no longer existing, then most Buddhist schools posit that entities of the past, entities that have gone into the past, meaning things that have ceased existing, have no ability to have any impact on the future. they exist as shikpa di tapa sigilwe. Pare, o mai bilu tilwe. Mana tinggal semai, kasa, rangi wa menje shikpa di, kan they merit to the one. So it's an unreal thing. So it's something that is steep. The term for shikpa means something that has undergone, it has perished, right, and gone into the path. Prasangikas have a view that the seeds of karma are in fact that cessation of the act when it was actually carried out, and that cessation is an entity which is still capable of having an effect. So they say shikpa, that means that entity which is ceased to exist, is functional. It is immobile. It has the ability to affect the future. That is a very unique notion, which is discussed in context. So most of the other schools describe this karmic seeds as some potential, which is a positive entity. There is from the fourth skandha, there are mental factors, which we've already addressed, and then there are non-mental relations. Non-mental relations is kind of the relationship between something physical and mental is this non-mental entity, formative factor that exists in the fourth skandha. So the seeds of the mental afflictions are those conditions, which are the potential. They were given some sort of positive status that are the essence of what those karmic seeds are. I think you guys say that's just a made up theory, that it's actually the cessation of the act, that unreal cessation of the unreal act in the first place has the power to have an effect on the future when that karma is right. So these are different explanation for doctrines, the Buddhist philosophical explanations that pertain to the topic of karma. Shikpa kurangi mo Shikpa is hardly Quran. So then a similar description can be given for virtuous acts. So if you make a prostration with a faithful mind, then the act of bowing or putting your hands together or prostrating on the floor, those are the informative form. That is the act itself when it's being carried out. That would be the virtuous physical act. And that virtuous physical act can be perceived by others. Then that's the informative form that is the physical act. According to Prasangica school, the general what we talk about is following the Prasangica. Then when you get up from doing prostration, then that act, that physical act, no longer exists. So nevertheless, having carried out that physical act with that virtuous motivation, then has a consequence. It has some impact. It has some effect in that it implants some kind of imprint on your being. So according to the non-prasangikas, that's some sort of positive entity that exists and has and continues to exist as an impermanent thing that has a continuum over time and remains with your being until it ripens, if it ripens. But for the prasangikas, there is no such positive potential or positive entity that has the capacity to produce a result. It's simply the fact that that virtuous act ceased, and the very cessation of that act is something that also has a similar quality, that it has its own continuum, even though it's a cessation of the act, and that is the potential that you carry with you. So this is again the Prasangika interpretation of how karma retains its ability to have the ability to produce a positive or negative result in the future.
Then you may chat in December, but
No.
that chat has in December, she will name teaching to Pacha Chia, and digging deputy to get jail. So,
So then most of the schools, other than the Vaibhashikas, but the Prasangikas, their view of karma, physical acts, for instance, have the quality that they're all mental in nature. That is to say, it's not the informative form, for instance, when you're prostrating. It's not the orientation of your body that's the physical act. It's the mental impulse or the mental intention or the mental volition to formulate that physical orientation of your body. It's that mental quality that is the physical karma. So the mental intention that prompts physical behavior, virtuous or non-virtuous, that if it's physical, that's physical karma, that intention for non-prasangika. And then when that intention is no longer active because you completed that physical act, then that intention deposits or implants some kind of imprint in your mind, which is the karmic seed or the karmic power to produce some kind of consequence in the future. So maybe we'll leave that there. So do you have some questions? So you can either rest or you can ask questions. Or, anyway. Microphone?
One question from yesterday. Yesterday we were talking, the topic was relationship between the mind to limitless, its capacity.
Oh, right, okay.
And so we had this very interesting discussion about relationship between a substance and qualities. We're talking about the qualities of objects and something existing inherently. I don't use word, but if we wish I could just talk a little bit more about this idea of how quality abides in the substance of that relationship. And
Mentally, you mean?
Yeah.
And that you don't have to go back to the beginning and carry out whatever it is to generate, in that case, compassion.
Yeah, not so much, but just I think a more basic question about the relationship between how quality abides in a substance. as it was explained on the Gyumed commentary section about how the mind can develop within us.
Right. Okay. 그래서 네, 그래서 그 말에 그 주로 펜시아가 이 이제 전부 또 지도가는야 안에 그래서 겨 남들 경험하지 거또 그래 안티슈라 샘기 네 공부도 좋아야 타메와 누리여와 이 도움이 받이 샘기 그래 안에 디 컴퓨터라 로직이 살살디 그러나 그냥 역스적인데 좋아도 다루가 하는 그래서 샘단 그래서 샘 이 캐주얼 소리 약간 콜 순도기 인제디 안에 그런 샘단 젤네 그런 또 많이 받이 다람시 이것이 계기 아니 그 관계와디 그런 그래서 사르도 저한테 진짜 뭐지 그런 이간 이야기 가질 수 있는 그런 만년도 누구야 말 그런 이 다른지 컴퓨터야 몸내 컴퓨터야 카메라 이 그래서 내가 솔직히 이걸 you want some just clarification right? 이걸 단도도 양자리 수에 있는 자 세로서 시간이 있는 양자수
같이 두지 친구 저 동동은 뭔가를 때니 아니 뭔가 탈진 거야 탈진 거야 있으려 그래봐 두지 친구 뭔가 저 동동 뭔가 탈진 거야 이 탈진 거 되는 뭔가 뭔가 탐이 되어 되게 많이 있어 근데 주단 주주의 나시는 있어요. 주단 주주의가 주주의 때문에 추억이셔야 돼. 이 때문에 왜 된다는 있어요. 다른 그 주주의랑 분이 되는 말이 있어. 주주의 때문에 왜 된다. 주주의 때문에 그래서 줘야 제 주주 마세를 때문에 된다 있어. 저들이 때문에 샘세리장을 때문에 샘세리장을 때문에 또 인지디아 공부도 세리디아 공부도 위에 미시 아니 많이 움직여 말이야. 그때 때문에 샘세리장을 때문에 아니 인지 공부가 투미도 위에 하면 돼야
did you understand that? Sort of. The starting point was that after it's acknowledged that there may or may not, there may be past and future lives. So it is possible to continue to cultivate spiritual knowledge in multiple lives. Then the second sort of position is that may be true, but there are limitations to how much you can develop. Limits to human understanding, limits to what a person can develop. So the Buddhist idea is that no, that's not true of the mind. The mind has a unique characteristic, and in the commentary they use the phrase ten. So ten is the notion of the substratum, or the thing upon which something rests, literally. And so the substratum, or the basis that mental qualities rely upon, is awareness. Much as this the quality of the mind that is luminous awareness, the most fundamental quality of our mind. That is something that is literally a firm basis, in the sense that that can be, that exists, that continues to exist, and that can support spiritual efforts in continually. It's never, unlike the example of water as a medium that can be heated. You can only heat water for so long, and then the water will disappear, and then the heat will have nothing to rely upon in order to continue to exist. Mind is not like that. Mind will always retain the ability to support spiritual qualities such as compassion. And therefore, when you cultivate compassion, also whatever level of development that you gain, they do not become lost. You can diminish qualities. We gave examples, right? Well, why is everybody not, have great compassion? Well, because hatred can, obstruct it and diminish it. But speaking generally, if you use those two kinds of effort continuously and with the same degree of, devotion, commitment, or dedication, then that compassion can be developed, and it will not sort of subside. So whatever you do, you can build it until it comes to the point, which is the kind of the key element of what we say unlimited, is that it occurs naturally. No effort is required, and that's the unique quality of the mind, that it can support that kind of development of spiritual qualities. So that argument is the second part of that section. Yeah.
Rinpoche was just talking about the Prasad perspective on karma. He said that it was the cessation of the act that brought the effect. But my understanding was that cessations are permanent phenomena. And so I was wondering if Rinpoche could expand on how, is it the effect of the cessation, or is there?
Well, right. So this is a unique. So the Prasad school is that some of the commentators have a list of what are the unique attributes of the Prasad school in Galupa literature, for instance. One of them is this: Shikpa, mobile, yimba. So Quran Jyoti, Wajik Shikpa di mobile yimba sumbares. Quran sama la Shikpa se takares. Quran Juwayo amares. And Quran de Juwa de Wome, Juta Woma de Sola, Shikpa di mobile mayimba sigrewa. This is the Quran di Shikpa mobile test in each progress.
Mami Shikpa news daily. Mami Shikpa di news everything. Mami Shikpa di no masana mami Shikpa mami the Shikpa marwa mami Shikpa news here mami Shikpa yes tina Shikpa in Yegi Shikpa seti Yegi Yegragi teaching liberty teaching liberty then uba teaching TV uba meta by teacher uba nine teaching uba jealousy uba meta by TV uba meta by teaching to shape beyond Jiba teaching. Now, children and Jiba move together. Just a name, I'm teaching even ship and move together. They cry, I'm teaching even ship and move together. I'm teaching to ship and together. Then, I'm teaching Tagaran to Jiba together. Jiba Jabana. To shape them. That thing I should have Mami Shivati, Nusavati, Manishi, that's a good key. But the secret will be that do it.
So did you get that? Yeah. Yeah. So the first part I was saying that an example of a cessation or what is it? Trying to think of destruction of something is something that is due to a condition. It is conditioned. It is brought about by certain other conditions. So one example is that a lamp, an oil lamp, for instance. So as long as there's oil feeding the wick, the lamp will continue to burn. Once the oil or the fuel is exhausted, then the lamp will be extinguished. And that quality of being extinguished is kind of the ideal or the way of thinking of what it means to become extinct. Right? If the entities become extinct. In this case, we're about karma. So the fact that causing something to become extinct is conditioned is an indication that that condition of becoming distinct then also is, by having been produced, something that does not lose its efficacy. Also, in another capacity. Right? So, and to give another example, the other example was that causes, so we think of the causes that produce a pot, for instance. Those are normally efficient causes that have the ability to create the existence of this entity, which we call a pot. At the same time that the pot is being created, the pot's impermanence is being produced, so to speak. And the impermanence of the pot is something that is this innate condition that from moment to moment, as each moment of the pot occurs, it doesn't require anything else for it to cease to exist. So that's another sort of indication of an active aspect to the cessation of something.
So that may have been wishes. Vajipati, Yatapati. Rajipa, Chibi Bikulam, Rani, Rajutam, Jimmy, the Rani, Jipachi, Dulam, Raji, Frangi, Jipacheva, Nini is a sympathy, and cheaper nobody is a sympathy, nobody is physically. Raji, Mumbai sympathy, Taka, Hekar, well, no one in a young man, no vision, no one is my young man. Then nobody lonely, no vision, no one is China. Just how good Taka is here. Thank you, Canada. He gave a movie is not she movies.
So there were two sort of differing ways of describing the phenomenon of ceasing to exist. Right. One way, the cessation of impermanent entities is innate to those entities when they are created. So they don't depend on any subsequent factor for them to cease from moment to moment. And that quality of impermanent entities by which they undergo destruction or perishing, they perish from moment to moment, is in fact created by the causes that create the object. This is a Tanjiro line of thinking. So in that sense, the destruction that occurs moment to moment, these impermanent things, is something that is also a created quality. And so therefore, when a karma or when an act ceases to exist, that the fact that the object, the act itself ends, creates the condition of being in a state of cessation. So in that sense, that cessation is something that's produced and something which continues to exist. It continues to have an effect on other things in the future. That's a Tanjiro principle. Not easy to comment. The second view, the view of the Prasangikas and others, which is to say that the cessation is something permanent, or that's what I say. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant non-Prasangikas. Prasangikas and other Buddhist schools, typically their view is that so the cessation of an entity, an object, whatever it may be, some impermanent entity, its cessation is occurs, right? It's an existent. It's something that we can identify as an entity, but when it occurs, right, it is no longer associated with the thing that has undergone cessation. So it can't be an attribute of the thing that ceased, because that thing is no longer there. And if it is not, you can't associate it with the thing that it's a cessation of, there also is nothing else that it can be associated with. So therefore it has no integrity, it has no validity as an independent entity. And so therefore it is an uncaused, sort of unreal, inefficient, state of no longer existing. And in that sense, it's not capable of having an effect on it. So we'll call it a day. Oh, no. I bring mine. I have one. I don't want to. Okay, that's cool. Thank you. That's a deal. Okay, so I have okay. And thank you for I spent time reading. He goes through the next 30 verses. I'm ready. And then he goes to completely different. That's okay. I don't mind. Yeah. I mean, it's a great class. What's up? No, you're just sitting there like you were. Well, yeah, I have English. My the name for like